All right, so I'm gonna try to record this. If you have toe plates, this is what I typically do to count the threads evenly on either side of the tie rod. This is just a little thing I've done doing my own alignments and stuff at home. Something that I do, you'll notice a little zip tie tail right here. I use this thing on the inner tie rod as a pointer. It's pretty much just a visual reference that I preset right before adjusting anything. First step, always rock the entire tie rod all the way forward in the tightening direction, because that's where you're going to want the reference point at the end of this. So I'm going to point this one straight at the ground. I'm doing 1.5 turns of the tie rod, which should get us pretty close to where I need it to be. So with the tie rod rocked forward and the zip tie pointing downwards, at this point, you can crack the jam nut loose. It's always 10 times more awkward than shooting a video. So jam nut is now loose. Now, because I am adding toe in, because I'm currently sitting at 10 millimeters of total toe out, the steering tie rod is behind the axle. So that means this tie rod has to get longer in order to go in the direction that I want. You lengthen the tie rod, the tires are going to toe in. In order to lengthen this, you have to unthread the inner tie rod out of the outer tie rod end. So I've got this zip tie visual reference mark. So I'm going to give this thing 1.5 spins in the direction of loosening it. So there's half. There's 1 full turn. And there's another. So at this point, without touching the zip tie at all, throw this in, we'll rock the tie rod all the way forward when we tighten it. You'll see why. Just a second. So as you go to tighten the nut, it's going to rock the tie rod forward. So once we get it to its end of its play, we're going to just add a little bit more there. Okay, so there is that. All right, so it's pointing just a little bit forward right now, so we'll just loosen it a tiny bit more. Okay. And then just cinch the jam nut, and we're good. We did our 1.5 turns, measured out, and we should be good to go on this side. At this point, you would go ahead and bring the car, roll it forward, roll it backwards, whatever. Make sure there's no binding in the steering and suspension. Throw the toe plates on, check the total toe, and go from there. So previously, we had about 10 millimeters of toe out. When you have toe out with toe plates, you'll have a bigger number on the front than what you have on the rear of the axle. So what we're sitting at here with the toe plates set up, we just take all of 20 seconds to throw against the car. Throw the tape measures underneath, and you check them. So we went up to, let's see, it's 182.8 and 183.7. So we're looking at about a 9 millimeter difference in front to rear, but because the smaller numbers in the front now, they actually turned the tie rods way the hell too far. Since we went 1.5 turns, What I'm probably gonna do is give each side 3/4 of a turn. I did drive this around the block, just real quick, and it was dead center steering wheel. It's just got way too much toe in right here. So we'll give it 3/4 of a turn on each tie rod end in the direction of tightening it, so that we're shortening the tie rods since they are behind the axle. And we'll recheck in a minute. All right, so we already adjusted the opposite side. We're gonna add a 3/4 turn of toe in. Something I just wanted to make a note, this is on the passenger side of the vehicle. These tie rods are not reverse threaded. So on this side, in order to add toe in, you actually have to rock this back toward the back of the vehicle because you're still shortening the threads. And the jam nut just tightened itself up, so hold up a second. So there's your zip tie. So there's 1/4 turn, half turn, and 3/4 turn. Okay, at this point, make sure the tie rod is rocked forward. It is. And we can cinch down the jam nut. And this side should be good. So we just got back from a real quick drive around the block again. Got the toe plates set up. We made the 3/4 of a turn adjustment on both sides since the steering wheel was straight, but the total toe was off. And after that, 1,835 millimeters and 1,835 millimeters. So we are at 0 toe, which is pretty much what I wanted. I'm not too picky as far as how close it is to being dead ass exact. For a frame of reference, using toe plates like this, because we're measuring at a distance of 580 millimeters from one end to the other, assuming you have accuracy within 1 millimeter, then that means that your accuracy in degrees, if you were to compare to an alignment rack, is it's just under 0.1 degrees of total toe tolerance, or 0.10 depending on the way you're looking at it. So that equates to 0.05 degrees of toe per side. So if it's repeatable, typically what I'll do is I'll do this and I'll drive the car for a day or so, and I'll just double check it after a longer drive just to make sure I didn't screw something up, and just put my mind at ease that it's okay. I've done this for years. I take my car once a year to get a real alignment on a good Hunter rack that's actually maintained. I go to Auto Logic of Virginia in Portsmouth and have Brad align it for me because he actually gives a shit, which is more than I can say about most places around here. And every time that I've had him check the toe, I typically set the toe with plates after this, after I had the subframe out, for instance, the last time, and the toe was within like 0.02 degrees of my targeted 0 toe. So this stuff is accurate if you take the time to do it right. Toe plates are super quick and easy. Assuming you're not screwing with the rear, then futzing around with strings, in my opinion, is not worth the time when you can just do this and set it up. For a time reference, I did all of this in about 30 minutes, and that's with filming and being awkward and having to redo video once or twice because I'm not trying to be a fucking YouTuber or anything like that. It's just whatever, just doing this to help somebody out on the Mark 7 forums. So, yep. Hopefully someone found this helpful as well. All right, so I took it on a test drive, verified everything is good, steering wheel is straight. Normally at this point, what I would be doing is I'd be assessing if the steering wheel was left off center or right off center when driving the car. Tow will never cause a pull unless the car has electric power steering. Some vehicles will do it, some won't. So I can't say that for all cases. This car, I haven't really observed anything. You can have the steering angle sensor reading like 5 degrees off and it doesn't give a shit. But essentially all that I do, the normal process would be you get inside the car and I basically just visualize, all right, was the steering wheel left off center or right off center while you're driving in a straight line. If you're driving in a straight line down the road and the wheel is slightly to the right, what I do is I visualize, I come back in here and I straighten the wheel. When you straighten the wheel, both of the tires turn left. The steering tie rods are behind the axle, so that means on the left side of the car, you have to lengthen that tie rod. And on the right side of the car, you have to shorten it in order to straighten the wheels in relation to the steering wheel. So all that you would do at that point is you would extend the tie rod on the left side, say a quarter turn, maybe a half turn, and you would shorten the tie rod on the right side by an equal amount. That would ensure that you're not changing the total tow. You're just robbing a little bit of length from one tie rod to give it to the other. And in the process, all that does is it moves the steering wheel in relation to the wheels on the car. It's a pretty simple concept. Once you kind of mentally visualize it, I find that's what helps me. Use the zip ties again for marking or kind of having a visual reference. You probably noticed some little paint marks on my tie rods for fine tuning. When you get down into less than a quarter of a turn, for instance, or whatever, I might use 1/4 of the nut or 1/6 of a turn from side to side to get it close. And you can also make little paint marks halfway up those flats and the points of the nut to use 1/12 of a turn to really fine tune it if you absolutely need to. This car actually has a really coarse, it's not so much a coarse thread, but a very fast steering rack ratio. So when I made a 1.5 turn adjustment, that made a much bigger change than I was really anticipating. So 1.5 turn adjustment basically added 20 millimeters of tow. So 3/4 of a turn ended up adding the 10 millimeters that we needed, 9.5 to 10 millimeters roughly. So if you happen to have a Mark 7 GTI, I'm not sure if the R has a faster rack or not, but that should be relatively close to at least get you in the ballpark and making changes that are reasonably close to where you're at. I typically go through the whole adjusting process, checking tow about 2 to 3 times, and then it's good.